Hello, everyone. Welcome to Data Fest. Are you all excited? I'm excited. I'm Anastasia Fullerton, and I work on the success team at Amplitude. We are absolutely thrilled to be the opening night event for Mind the Product. We've had the pleasure for the last 2 years to bring together some of the brightest minds in product. We are so excited to have you all here and can't wait for our stellar speakers to share their perspectives and experiences. Before we get to the speakers, we have some exciting news. Amplitude will be hosting our first annual conference, Amplify, on July 9th. Yep, that's right. Amplify is a one-day master class focused on building products and driving businesses' growth from some of the Silicon Valley stars. You'll hear from experts in both product and growth from companies like Netflix, Uber, HubSpot, and many others. We are hoping to see you all there. In fact, tonight we will be giving away 5 tickets to some of our audience members. The tickets go on sale tonight with a starting price of $3.99. But we're happy to share this conference with a few of you if you engage with us on social. So please use the hashtag #DataFest, and we will enter you to win. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker and my colleague. He's the head of product analytics at Amplitude, and he brings with him many years of consulting corporations on product analytics and growth. He has a diverse background in biotech and pharmaceuticals, and then moved on to the on-demand economy. He was most recently at Postmates, where he started their growth engineering team. Here he combined engineering, product, and data to make Postmates grow quickly. He has taken product analytics, growth optimization, and experimentation to drive an impact, culture-centric company. So please join me in welcoming Tanner McGrath to the stage.
Thank you, Anastasia. Before we get started, I wanted to share some exciting news with all of you. If you're not familiar with our first version of Mastering Retention, it was our first book put out by Amplitude. We have the first chapter of our second book on engagement games over by the food. So if you haven't picked up a copy yet, please pick up a copy. It's really going to change the way you think about engagement and how you can transform your company to being product-led. At Amplitude, we help people like you build better products. And what we've seen over the past years is that what it takes to build products that customers love has truly changed. That when we look at the responsibility us as product people have, so much of everyone's life is spent engaging with digital products that we're creating. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we understand the context and the interaction within those products. So when we think about the simplistic tools that we've had, it's really difficult to capture all of that in page views and purchase events. A recent study done by MIT shows that on average daily, consumers are spending 200 minutes a day engaging with digital products across all aspects of their life. The amount of complexity and context contained in these interactions is mind-blowing. I know I've spent years looking at this information at Postmates, and if you just take a single week of some of our most advanced users on the platform, just looking at all of that information, you could spend years just looking at that part of the interaction with their product and their experience. What we're also seeing is that industries are changing so much faster than they have before. When we look at the time it took to reach 100 million users from the internet, it took about 8 years. When we look at Pokemon Go and how quickly it reached 100 million users, we're talking on the magnitude of days, 3 days. that completely changed what it means to be a product manager in the gaming industry. And that type of change is happening in all industries. Now, with that, we're also seeing that it's becoming easier and easier to get your product into the digital world. But the bar is ever raising for product-led companies. A recent report says that only 1 in 10,000 products that are actually launched are going to be deemed a commercial success after 2 to 3 years. That means that not only were our jobs hard before, they're getting harder and harder. So what does that mean? That means that the old way of doing things isn't really going to cut it. And what we're seeing is that we as product people and as a community, we need better ways to understand our customers' interactions. We need something more than just the tools that we had before. We need behavioral sciences to understand all of the interactions that our consumers are having with not only our product, but the digital landscape as a whole. And that's what we're seeing in companies like Dropbox, Spotify that are product-led, is that they're taking the best from agile principles, building fast, shipping, and then quickly learning from what they've done to be able to iterate and tying that to business outcomes. And that's what you really need to do in this new era is, as a product-led company, you need to be able to drive business outcomes and create value that your organization can monetize. And it's about the community and about investing in the community, because we're not going to be able to do this alone. And that's what I'm so grateful that all of you came out here today, is that if you think about it, with this great power, just like with the printing press would have not had the revolution that it had without the authors. And that's what this is all about tonight. And that's why I'm so grateful that you all are here, and I'm so excited to introduce another leader in the product community who really helped create and found products that count. She's a Silicon Valley VC, a visionary. Her work really speaks for itself. If you look at what she's accomplished and the companies that she's worked with, she's not only an investor in Amplitude and in the community, she has really helped transform how we think about digital products. And what I'd love to do is invite SC Moatti to come onto the stage. If you could please all welcome me with a round of applause. We'll start our first fireside chat. Thank you. All right, SC. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure and honor to be here.
So I've learned so much from you in the community, and I think one of the things that really stands out when we think about people spending 200 minutes a day in digital products is this whole expectation with identity and context. How do you think about identity and context in this new day and age with all of these digital products?
Yeah, absolutely. So can everybody hear me? Okay, awesome. So when people ask me, like, what's the essence of mobility, right? We had the mobile era, then we had the big data, then AI. Now we're talking about connected cars. All of that is mobility. And what is the essence of that? I use those two words, right? Identity and context. So knowing that it's me, not like an online avatar or a billboard-like persona, knowing that it's me who's like using my phone right now or using my watch is really a huge asset, and knowing where I am and what I do. And when I talk to companies who are thinking about like how do I embrace this mobility, what I recommend to them is that they look at all of what that means, right? So identity, it's really like what is your own behavior? What are who are your friends? Who are your connections? What are you doing right now? What are your health data? and then context, your location, your calendar, and basically that translates for us product people into a list of permissions. And thinking about, what would I do if I had permission from this user to do something? How could I transform my service? How could I make it really unique? We just invested in a company that I'm very excited about called Hyper. And by the way, full disclosure, we're also investors very proudly in Amplitude. But Hyper is a mobile, essentially mobile CRM. And when you think about CRM, an eternity ago, I used to work for Siebel Systems, and then we got disrupted by Salesforce, and that was like the web era. But since then, there hasn't been really an essentially mobile CRM. So that company, what they do is they take all of our social data and they work with a customer like Marriott, and they say, hey, Marriott, at your hotel over there in the Philippines, this is what people are saying about you, and this is how you can turn this conversation into customer relationship, engagement, retention, better service, more business. And then they go and they say, well, and in Berlin, like here's what the people who stay at one of your competitors are doing or are saying. And they use that information, mobile, local, to really transform the way they think about CRM. So I think that's really amazing. I want to say one more thing before we go to the next question. So when you think about that list of permission and you ask yourself, okay, so what can I do with my business if I'm asking to get access to someone's location? Or what can I do with my business if I ask somebody to get access to their health information that I couldn't do before? Then the next question is, all right, so if I want to ask for permission to send push notification or permission to access my camera roll and so on and so forth, when is the right time for me to ask for those permissions? And the answer I generally give there is to build relationships, you either ask like as early as possible in the life cycle or the customer journey, or as late as possible. And I'll give you two simple examples. When people use WhatsApp, it's essential in the WhatsApp service to have access to push notification because WhatsApp is a real-time messaging service. So when you ask for permission to send you and I push notifications, you ask as early as possible, because if one of us even doesn't have access to permission to give or receive push notifications, neither of us is going to have a great experience on WhatsApp. So you ask as early as possible. And by the way, when you don't give that permission to WhatsApp, they tell you, well, sorry, you cannot use WhatsApp. Yeah. And then when you want to send a photo on WhatsApp, to ask for the permission to, like for me to send you a picture, it's really more like as late as possible, because I'm already in the process of wanting to send you a picture. Mm-hmm. Well, by the way, do you want to give me access to your camera? Well, of course, because I want to send you a picture, right? So it's either as early as possible if it's mission critical, essential to the service, or as late as possible in the customer journey.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was completely my experience at Postmates. If you try to walk them through too long in the onboarding and prompt them later, it's kind of like being boxed into the friend zone. They're not sure if they want to jump in yet. And so yeah, it is absolutely exactly what you described. That's a great best practice that people here can take with them. So you talked a bit about identity and context and Hyper. I'd really like to kind of dig deeper into how you see services transforming. You talked a bit about Marriott. If you could just maybe unpack that a bit more for the audience, because I think how services are changing in this new world and identity and context is really exploding how people are building product.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of examples on that. When you think about any service, right? Like what is it that you can do when you have someone's identity or someone's context? So I'll take a couple of very simple examples. Yeah. One is when you work for, like in the real estate industry, like a fairly boring industry. I mean, I used to work in that industry. But and you know, people look for a place to rent. So it used to be that people would just like walk around the street and look for signs, right? And then with the internet era, it then became that, okay, you had to be like stuck in front of your computer to get that kind of access to listings for rent. Well, now with, you know, using identity and context, you can have people just walk around the street and be notified of listings that are available in, you know, neighborhoods that they are walking around in, and fit their criteria, just, you know, by understanding their preferences. I think that's a very simple example, but it's also very powerful because it shows you how, you know, having someone's identity and having someone's context is going to make you have a service that couldn't be, you know, wasn't possible before. Postmates is such a perfect example as well, where you know, the quality of service that is being offered just wasn't possible before.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, and that's why if you look at products like Postmates Pickup, is that the more these companies can understand about your behavior, the better they can actually tailor that experience. And so we touched a bit on it earlier in privacy, and you mentioned some best practices on when we should ask for permission. So is there any other guidance you could give? Because really this whole world is really only possible if you're able to secure those permissions.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's, you know, the big topic of 2018. Like, what are people doing with my data? I think really the way I look at it is thinking about three different situations, right? And it really centers around who's using my data. Is it a person? Is it a corporation? Or is it a government? And if it's a person, we actually, as a society, have a pretty clear answer to that. We don't like identity theft, and so we don't want anybody using our data. So as a product manager, what it means is you have to like really protect against identity theft, i.e. a person using your personal data. Now, a corporation, we actually also, we don't really like to admit it, but we also have a pretty clear answer, which is we do like it when a company uses our data. We do like it because it gives us better advertising, because it gives us access to free services. And so even though it's not, you know, politically correct to say we like it, we do like that. And then the third category is a government using our data. And there we have really mixed feelings, because we know from, you know, history or other countries that, you know, it can be dangerous and really dangerous. We don't really like the idea of Big Brother, of course, and of course I don't like that either at all. But on the other hand, if you look at the way today our government, or any governments, protects us from identity, from terrorist threats, for example. At the border, they use some very artificial criteria. They use, you know, your race, your gender, the color of your skin, your age, the country you're from, which are very sort of rough approximation for how big of a terrorist risk are you. Mm-hmm. And it's a much grosser approximation than, you know, information like, are you calling terrorists? Or are you meeting with terrorists, which we can get from technology. Yeah. So I think that what's happening right now is we don't really have policies in place, and we are sort of shying away from the debate, but it could get us a lot farther along to actually have that discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think we talked about identity, we talked about context, we kind of understand this new world and what's all available to us, and the question that always comes to mind is, okay, well, how do I leverage all of this as an organization to truly drive growth and business outcomes for my company? And I know Andrew Chen has said that you are a genius at building mobile products that people love, and if you could just help us understand, I think one of my favorite frameworks out there is how you break down growth, and that it's both a science and an art. If you could just expand on that. Yeah,
absolutely. The big question, like, what do you do with all that data? So the science part is really what many of you here know, which is the, you know, growth hacking or lean agile or any of those methodologies, which basically, in essence, say, take a use case and define a success metric for it, and then put everything leading towards that metrics into a funnel, and then optimize the conversion of that funnel so that it's not like so indented, but it's like wider and wider. And you do that using tools like Amplitude. And as you instrument your funnel and understand different conversion, you start slicing and dicing that funnel. You say, okay, so can I slice it by platform, like web versus Android versus iPhone? Can I slice it by geography? Can I slice it by source, right? Whether it's advertising, email, and so on. And then you have sort of sub-funnels, and some of them convert better than others. And you try to get the ones that don't convert super well to convert better, like closer to the ones that convert better. And so overall, as you kind of go through that analysis, you improve the overall conversion of your funnel. And if you do that, you'll get some pretty incredible results, which I think you got when you were at Postmates. But at some point, and by the way, like only say 20% of companies do that, so there's room for growth. But if you do that well, at some point you'll hit diminishing returns because you basically get into a system that's really very systematic and repetitive and soon enough gives you diminishing returns. And so that's where the art part comes from. And the art part, the way I like to think about it is, I'm originally an engineer, so I like to think about it in engineering teams. So how do I think about art as an engineer? How do I think outside the funnel? and so I think, okay, what's the perfect funnel? And you know, the perfect funnel as an engineer is like, okay, so how wide does it need to be? Infinitely wide. So everybody should love my product. And then how deep does it need to be? Actually infinitely shallow. So the perfect funnel is sort of like a horizon, right? Like an infinite flat surface. And when I give those talks on the East Coast or abroad, people are like, oh yeah, she's from California, like whatever. But there's a logic to the madness. So what is a tool that's like a creative tool that's going to create that infinite funnel, and what is the tool that's going to flatten that funnel? So I'll give you two examples. The tool that's going to flatten your funnel is a tool that Amazon, I think, really masters, which is the other books you may like or other items you may like. Which, because I'm a bookworm, so I always go to Amazon and I have the intention of buying one book, but then I end up with like 6 or 7, because they are so skilled at immediately after I buy one book, recommending like 3 or 4 books that I may like. We implemented that technique. I was mentioning a case of real estate a few minutes ago. We implemented that technique in the context of helping people find a place to rent. We said, oh, you just applied to rent that listing. Here are 3 similar ones. Would you be interested in renting them possibly? And we quadrupled that conversion because everybody was interested. And guess what? It was really nice because that conversion was actually our monetization mechanism, so we also quadrupled our revenue. And that was kind of cool. So that's something that will really flatten your funnel rather than go through this funnel of finding another new book or finding another place to rent. You just like apply for 4 places or buy 4 books one at a time. Makes your funnel really, really flat. And then a tool that makes your funnel infinite is, for example, the Zillow Zestimate, which is really interesting because when you buy a home, on average, people buy a home in the US once every 5 years. So if you're in the real estate business, you're sort of out of luck when it comes to the velocity of your business, except if you're able to tell people how much their house is worth. And then all of a sudden, whether they are buying it or renting it, they want to know that pretty often. And then they also start to be curious about the value of their boss's house. Or, yeah, I get it. And so all of a sudden, right, you don't have just like a 1 in a 5-year use case, you have a several times a day, right? What about my ex-boyfriend? And what about, right? Ex-girlfriend too. And so on and so forth. So that makes your funnel infinite, and that's a great way to really change the way you think about growth, and you think about inside the funnel and then outside the funnel and in and out.
I really love that breakdown, because one of the biggest challenges I see with organizations, especially the other 80% that hasn't mastered the first part you mentioned, is finding balance, right? You talked about science and art. I think we all know that finding a balance between science and art is extremely difficult, and that's really what the product community has tried to do over the years. And so for people who are going on this journey, for organizations who are going on this journey trying to drive growth, how do they find balance between science and art, and how would they get started?
Yeah, I think that's the hard part in the problem, because it has to do with culture, right? And I think about that as a risk profile. Like, so you think, what's the cost of a mistake in different organizations? So you can pick, for example, Mercedes, right? Mercedes, when they ship a product, like, there's zero room for error. So the cost of a mistake is very, very high. And therefore, the risk profile of the people who work at a company like this is, they're very risk averse. So they will measure everything. They will be, highly data driven. On the other hand, you take a company like Facebook, when they were like a free website, basically, you think, oh, what's the cost of a mistake? Well, the cost of a mistake is close to zero, right? It's a free website. Website can be fixed in a few hours. So if you make a mistake, a few people are going to be unhappy, but okay, so what? So the risk profile of people who are in that kind of environment is very, very high, right? And then you take sort of big cultural shifts like mobile into that equation, and all of a sudden, you have sort of a convergence of those different types of risk profiles. So, Facebook after mobile is a lot more risk adverse, because, when you make a mistake on mobile, it sticks with you, like you get all those reviews, people delete your app, and so on and so forth. So you have more adversity to risk. And then with Mercedes, I'm not privy to their strategy, but I would imagine that they will have something like an Uberization of their strategy, and so they become less risk adverse. So when you think about like that change in profile of the people who are building those organizations, they have to reinvent themselves constantly, right? And so the culture in those organizations has to evolve, and there's nothing like alternating between the art and science to actually shake up a culture.
So that's a great point. For the people who might be in that 80% bucket right now, they want to find that balance in the organization. How would you recommend that they get started in that transformation, and where can they learn more? Yeah, so one thing that one word or expression that I really like to use is selective insulation. So you'll basically find pockets in the organization that you'll say, okay, that pocket, I'm going to let them do whatever it is they're doing, whether they are highly data-driven and they measure everything they do, or completely creative, like a Pixar unit, and just like let loose. I'm going to let them do what they do, but that's going to infiltrate in the rest of my organization. And if you're strategic about it, you put a couple of those like insulated areas, and then it permeates into the rest of the organization. So when I worked for Facebook, I think that part we did okay. We said, okay, so we're going to start a mobile unit. We realized we were late to mobile. We're very, very late. So we really need to rush. So we're going to create a very separate standalone mobile unit. And then what happened after a few months is that mobile unit, like everybody was disregarding it because it was small at the time. But that mobile unit started to do well. And so then everybody started to look at them and say, well, wait a minute, like you took my newsfeed, and you took my photos, and you took my events. And so people like basically like the larger organization said, okay, so I'm going to kind of reclaim those products. And so there was a big reorg, and they say, okay, now there's no more mobile unit. Now everybody owns web, mobile, everything, cross-platform. You have it, you own it.
And that goes well for a little while until all of a sudden you get like a very bad mobile release. And then the mobile people, the disgruntled mobile people said, I told you so. And so now you sort of recreate a smaller, slightly different mobile unit that's going to be sure to ensure that there's no bad release. But the rest of the organization is going to have like kind of cross-platform ownership. So you basically, have to go, I know it doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but you have to go through a couple of reorganizations to find that balance. But at the same time, if you don't go through that, then, what happens to you is basically what happened at, Nokia, and I was there when things started to really kind of fall apart, where nobody's really evolving or moving, everybody's sort of clinging to their own organization, and that doesn't work.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to open it up to the community here to see if we have any questions. So we have some mics that are being walked around. So if you have questions in the audience, please raise your hand.
Thanks for your comments. My question is about how you think about avoiding analysis paralysis. Like, at what point do you stop and just do things?
So yes, so you're talking about an organization that's basically trying to measure everything to the nth degree. One way that I think you can get away from that is by saying, okay, let's pick 3 things to test. Because very often when you get into analysis paralysis, it's because you want to make the perfect decision, and it's really hard to find the right answer to complex questions. I'm on the board of a company who does just that. They run a lot of A/B tests for clients. They're a service organization, and they say after having done that, they're like, 35 people for 5 years, that they still get more than half of their experiments wrong. and they're experts. So, sort of lowering the bar a little bit, saying, let's pick 3 experiments that we're going to run this month. Just like, you pick one, you pick one, you pick one. And go with that. I think that gets the ball moving a little bit.
Yeah, and just to chime in, there's 2 things that I've seen in my experience really help. I think a lot of times companies get the ratio wrong. You spend 20% of the time thinking about the question, 80% of the time analyzing. I would flip that on the head. If you find yourself in analysis paralysis, it's probably because you should be spending 80% of the time defining the question and 20% of the time actually doing the right analysis. And then the last thing I'll add is that the whole point of analyzing is to understand your users and their behavior. So the second you can move into actually shipping something to understand the behavior, to her point about picking an experiment and moving forward, that's really when you should stop, is ask yourself, well, do we need to do more? And what can we actually do right now in the leanest way possible to understand more? Instead of looking at your historical information, maybe you need to collect new information. So I think we'll take another question. Anyone else has one?
Hi. So my question is, I work in the airline industry, and I've been looking at a couple of different booking experiences lately, namely Booking.com, as well as Airbnb. Both optimize quite a lot. How do you go about balancing the short-term need for conversion rate optimization with the more long-term needs of user experience?
Yeah, so just to repeat the question, you're trying to understand how do you balance the short-term versus the long-term needs of the organization when it comes to optimizing. I can kick it off. Just like in my experience, it's all about understanding like local and global optimums, right? So when are you trying to optimize a product that's probably at a local optimum, and when do you actually need to change the product in a larger way to actually get to a higher global maximum. And so that's how I really think about balancing the short term and the long term, is that if you spend too much time trying to optimize for a local maximum, is that you're going to be missing the bigger picture. I don't know if you have anything to add, Essie.
I fully agree with that. I also think about it as you want to start with the bottom of your funnel. Like, how great of an experience are you building and delivering? And your core product team should be focused on delivering that quality experience. And then you layer a growth team on top of that that's going to say, wait, we could double this if we did that, right? We could double this if we added like a red button or whatever. You know, they do a lot more than this. But you know, your product organization is the stable one, and your growth organization is the very opportunistic one that's going to look for where in my entire product universe, right, am I going to find the biggest opportunity for the next 2 months? Right here, I'm going to double that ratio. Right there, I'm going to triple that one. And so sort of working your way up on all the different product funnels from there. So you don't want to have a growth team that's like dedicated to a product. You want them to go fetch the biggest return.
All right. Well, please join me in giving Essie a round of applause.
Thank
you for joining us up here.
Thank you.